Very much. Okay? Barry. This is Barry, my co-chair. He will introduce Christian. Thank you.
Yeah, our next presentation, Christian Teuschel from RIPE NCC is going to talk about a country overview of Romania.
All right. Well, dear SCE attendees, good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. This is not my first SCE meeting. It's actually my second one. And I have to say that I really like to come back to the SCE region. It might not be a huge community, but it's definitely an active community. And talking about arrival. So yesterday, after spending 6 hours on the Bucharest airport, which, after 2 hours, when you're going to look at the runway, that has some kind of meditational effect. I arrived quite late here in Timisoara. So I missed the majority of the social event. That's of course bad, but I tried to catch up. So at around midnight, I found couple of people that were still at the social event. These are the usual suspects that you usually find at social events a bit longer. And the reason why I'm telling that is we went back to the hotel and then we had a last drink. And then there were coming, a lot of people were coming to the hotel and apparently they were coming from a wedding. And one couple was crazy enough to join us. So it was a German couple, but that has nothing to do with that. What was interesting was that he was an engineer, a development engineer for Daimler, and his wife, girlfriend, was an engineer at Bosch. And what really surprised me that they had no clue who is running or how the internet works. I mean, apart from Facebook, right? And that kind of reminded me of a bit of the responsibility that we all have to carry in the sense of to the society, right? And my presentation will also touch a little bit on these parts. And what I specifically found very funny was when Jan tried to explain them about peering or traffic shaping, and Jan, they really had no clue about the internet. So I created this presentation under the assumption that you have a bit of understanding of the internet. And before we're gonna go into the key topics related to Romania, so Axel presented about what's going on at the RIPE NCC. This presentation is more about what's going on in Romania. I just wanted to start with a bit of pre-knowledge. So first of all, this presentation is data-driven, right? This is not my opinion, this is not Jan's opinion. This is based on data, purely, right? The only thing that I did was I wrapped it for you to better understand it. And what would be a data-driven presentation without data? And here I just wanted to highlight that the RIPE NCC provides 3 very important data sets that can help to form data-driven decisions. The first one is the RIPE database, the registry. The second one is routing information, so you might have heard about this. And the third one is example of active measurements, RIPE Atlas. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And what would all this data be if you can't access the data? So we have that covered as well. That's RIPEstat. It is quite popular. So at the moment we have around 55 million requests per day, coming from 1.7 million unique IP addresses. So it's a couple of users. And that gets me to the meat of my presentation, and that's the country view on Romania. this presentation is leaned on very much on data science, and in data science, comparison is a very important tool to get the picture. And I tried to do that by putting together a couple of countries, and I think you can already guess why I chose for these three countries. So we have Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia. That is purely because they are neighboring countries, because you can assume that the development in this region is a bit coherent, but we're going to see with the data that that might not be the case. Then this slide is mainly for me because you know the sizes of the countries, but I usually don't trust the Mercator projection in maps. And it shows that Romania is the biggest one. Then we have Bulgaria and Serbia. What's a bit more important is the population. Well, let me explain why I think it's important, because population is a direct indicator for economic potential, right? The more people you have in a country, the more customers you have, and so on. I also want to bridge the gap later on. In one topic, I'm going to touch the gap between internet and economy, but this is a preparation for that. And what I would like to ask you to remember, I mean, there's a lot of numbers. You don't need to remember all the numbers because you can also download the presentation. But keep in mind this one, that Bulgaria and Serbia have around 1/3 of the population of Romania. So this will be a thread that I'm going to keep in the presentation. And the first topic that I want to cover is IPv4 depletion. I mean, you all know that we're running out of IPv4. The current internet is running on IPv4, so I think it would be foolish to think that we can switch and pull the plug on IPv4 tomorrow. That's not possible. But let's see how much prepared these countries are. The first data set to look at would be the number of internet registered IPv4 resources, right? And here we're going to see like Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia. The constellation between Romania and Bulgaria is basically what we would expect from the population, but Serbia is breaking this trend. Historically, you can put a lot of interpretation into the number of resources, but I don't want to do that right now because we simply don't have the time. What's I think more important is the space. So not the number of resources, not allocations, assignments. It's what is the available IP space from these resources. And here we're going to see a slightly different picture. So Romania at the moment has 8.2 million IP addresses, Bulgaria has 4.4 million, and Serbia 2.4. And here you already see that Bulgaria is in a way 50% and not 30%. Serbia would much more fit into the picture that we saw from the population. And of course, you also noticed for Romania that there is a jump. Did I say jump? No, I meant drop in the number of IPv4 resources. But actually the story that I want to build up has kind of a different direction, and that goes in the way of looking at the internet penetration. Internet penetration, for people that don't know that, basically just measures how many people within a country have access to the internet. So that doesn't qualify what kind of access, if that's mobile, if that's broadband or something like that, but have access to the internet. Here we're going to see that the countries are basically the same. So we have Romania, Bulgaria with 60% and Serbia slightly more. And right now, if we're going to combine that with the population, then we can achieve the number of internet users, right? And why is that important? The number of internet users is an indicator for the digital economy, right? And I think we all agree that in the last 20 maybe only 20 years, that the digital economy is the driver for economic growth, right? I mean, we all are involved in the digital economy, and the companies with the highest market value right now on Earth are in the digital economy. So this is something very important to keep in mind. What we're going to see here is that Romania has around 11,000 internet users, and then Serbia, because the internet penetration is a bit higher, has a bit more. But what I want to actually get to is this one. Let's combine the number of IPv4 addresses that we have per country with the number of internet users. Because then we're going to get to a metric, and don't understand this metric as the absolutely true value, because that doesn't take infrastructure into account. But you know that, right? But it gives an indicator of the complexity of the network stack that is required to get a country online. And here we're going to see that Romania has roughly 1.3 internet users per IPv4 address. Bulgaria has less than that, and Serbia is in this questionable sense leading, right? Because I don't need to explain you that more means not better, because we need more network address translation that makes the stack more complex, and it breaks the end-to-end principle of the internet. What we're looking here is data from the World Bank combined with data from the RIPE NCC. The World Bank apparently doesn't really provide real-time data, and I think it would be also very difficult, but the data that we're going to see here is from 2016. And that's related to the population and the internet penetration. I'm going to keep that fixed, and right now I'm going to move forward to the number of IP addresses in 2018. And let's see how the picture changes. So what we're going to see here is that Romania is catching up in the sense of having more internet users need to share an IPv4 address, whereas Serbia is improving in that sense. Then slightly not 100% related, or not indirectly maybe, to the development of IPv4. I was looking also at the development of LRs, so local internet registries, and well, I can't give out prizes, but if you guess it right, then I'm happy to offer you a coffee later. Here we have two countries, and these graphs show the development of LRs in the country, and who could tell me what these countries are? All right, I'm gonna make it very simple. I'm gonna tell you. I mean, coffee is anyway for free, so it doesn't really matter. So here we have Serbia, we have Bulgaria, and interestingly enough, in Romania we have, since the beginning of the year, quite an increase of LR accounts. Okay, that will get me to the second topic, which is internet and economy. And I started to think about this topic after I read a study from the World Bank, which basically describes that the relationship between means of communication and economic power in a country is correlated. So I trust the people from the World Bank that they isolated all the other factors. But in essence, it means that I'm going to pick out one example. If you're going to increase the broadband penetration in a country by 10%, then you can expect that the economy grows at least at 1%. And that is a lot of value. And I was interested to look at the gross domestic product, and I found this data. So this is again for 2016. It might be slightly different right now, but I think that the ballpark is correct. So we have Romania leading in this sense, and before I showed you absolute numbers, these are relative numbers. So this is GDP per capita, so you can compare it, right? Romania is leading in that, then we have Bulgaria, and then we have Serbia. Then I was interested to see how is that related to the broadband penetration, and we're gonna get to this picture. And this is very interesting because not necessarily because of the GDP related to the broadband penetration, but it's actually the value, which is roughly around 20% broadband penetration for these 3 countries. And if you're going to compare that with a country like Germany, where the broadband penetration is much higher, at around 40%, this basically is very positive in the sense of that it shows a lot of opportunity. Given that the study of the World Bank is correct, then there's still a lot of room to grow in the broadband penetration, which should have a positive effect on the economy. And I included the historical development of the GDP and the broadband subscription to make one point. First of all, just before the study was released, 2010, there was a correlation, a very strong correlation between broadband penetration and GDP, but don't be fooled, right? I mean, economy is not being steered solely by broadband penetration. I think there are a lot of factors, and this graph is a good example of that, because basically we all know what happened around here, right? That was the second great contraction, aka the financial crisis, which had a huge influence on basically every country that was dealing in the global economy, which I think apart from North Korea is every country. Then let's get to another topic which I find very interesting, talking about future and influence on economy, because I think we cannot go by IPv6 if we're going to talk about economy. I guess you're going to agree that when the RIPE NCC was founded in April 1992, nobody could have imagined that our world will change so dramatically. Uber, Airbnb, Google, Facebook. And that was enabled by an invention which is what we right now deal with, the internet. And I think that IPv6, with the ability to provide you a lot of address space and that possibility to play around with an address space that's even bigger than the internet as we know it right now at home, will be very disruptive for a lot of inventions. And I think right now we can't even imagine in which direction that will go. But we should not lose the possibility that we're gonna go there. And for that we need IPv6. So let's see what's the situation in the countries. I mean, we definitely see that IPv6 is not as popular as IPv4. We see that with the number of registered resources, where we're gonna have Romania with 214, then we have Bulgaria with 194, and then 73 in Serbia. And here again, if you recall that Bulgaria and Serbia is around 1/3 of the population of Romania, then between Romania and Bulgaria, that is again not true anymore, that correlation. Right now, again, we could look at the historical development, which I think is not too interesting. And since the policies, how IPv6 is being given out to members is kind of consolidated over the last few years, we see also a direct correlation between the number of resources and the space. I'm not going to go into the game between how many internet users we have in a country and how many IP addresses they will have, because IPv6 is just huge. That would be an unfair comparison. But related to IPv6, what's a more practical measurement is example of active measurements. And here where I would like to show data that's being collected by Epinic. In a nutshell, they're using Google advertisements to distribute measurement probes, software-based, and then measure what is the adoption rate of end users related to a country related to IPv6. And of course, we're going to have some top players like Belgium, India, the US, Germany, or Greece. And in this comparison, Romania is actually not doing that bad. So we have around 12% of end users that are perceived by these measurements as being IPv6 enabled. And this is especially good if you're going to look at the entire comparison. Because above Romania, we have 31 countries or regions, and below them, so basically a lot of countries and regions, they do much worse related to IPv6 adoption. Then this is so far everything that I wanted to show you related to graphs and resources. I invite you to look up all this information yourself by going to stat.ripe.net. And I also compiled a page where you're going to see all these graphs that I just showed you in an interactive manner. So you can download the slides and then go to this link. Last and not least, we have active measurements. Of course, no way leads around RIPE Atlas if we're going to talk about active internet measurements. Since activity related to my audience is very close to my heart, I wanted to ask you how many of you know about RIPE Atlas, and please raise your hand. All right, okay, that's not as many as I expected. So let me quickly explain what RIPE Atlas is. RIPE Atlas is a measurement network for active internet measurements that's being built from hardware devices that we're going to give out to volunteers. They host devices at home, and as soon as the devices are connected, they start to run measurements. And examples of these measurements could be ping measurement, traceroute measurements, to a limited extent also HTTP measurements, and so on. Recently, we just celebrated to have more than 10,000 probes out there, which covers around 7% of all IPv4 networks and 9% of all IPv6 networks. But why I'm telling you that? I'm telling you that because we do measurements with that, and we're going to analyze these measurements, that the information that we're going to get from that we can feedback to you. But before I'm going to show you examples of these measurements, I need to put that a little bit in perspective. So first of all, in Romania, as of Sunday, we had 79 connected probes. On the other side, we also have 55 abandoned probes and a couple of disconnected probes. So two things. If you're a proud owner of an Atlas probe, please check if it's connected, because if it's not connected, it would be a waste, right? And if you are very excited about this project, and you will, after I'm going to show you the examples that we can create with that, then you can approach me or one of my colleagues, and we're going to show you how you can apply for this project. But coming back to the presentation, so we have 79 probes in Romania versus around 1,000 networks that are participating on the internet. So that means that are in the routing table and situated in Romania. So that means that in the best case, we would only cover around 8% of all the networks in Romania. So keep that in mind when I'm going to go to the next slide. And Axel already mentioned it, the IXP country JEDI. And right now I want to give you a bit more thorough introduction into what the IXP country JEDI is, because that's necessary to interpret the results properly. So we know that we have a couple of probes in a country, and we can control what kind of measurements they run. So what we do, we're going to select a couple of probes within the country, and we let them run a trace route from one probe in the country to another probe in the country. So what would you expect? You would expect a trace route from source and destination within a country. That is kind of considered all local, right? in the country. And then what we also do is we're going to take this set of trace routes, we're going to take the hops, the IP addresses that we're going to collect, and geolocate them. And then we're going to put that on a map, for example, but we also provide it in different forms. I'm going to show you a bit later. And this, of course, is not the ground truth, how traffic flows. Because you all know traffic shaping, right? I mean, a trace route can go a different way than, for example, Skype traffic or something like that. But it could be an indicator for local traffic, how local traffic flows. But there are two things that can go wrong with that. First of all, it can be that we don't have enough probes in the country to draw a proper picture of the situation in a country, right? Always keep that in mind. The other problem is the geo-IP data set. You know, basically the simple mapping between an IP address and a location. Sounds very simple, but is in a way not, right? Everyone who worked ever with geo-blocking or something like that, it's not easy because the internet is hierarchical, whereas geographical information are not easily mapped to a hierarchy in a way. So, with all these warning signs, I'm going to show you right now the map of Romania that was collected last weekend. And here we're going to see on the left IPv4, the status of IPv4, and on the right IPv6. And we're going to see that local traffic, considered local traffic, is in a couple of situations leaving the country. So we see the some dominant IXPs in Europe. And, well, I don't need to tell you that as soon as local traffic leaves the country, that's in three ways not optimal. First of all, from the technical perspective, because the latency will be increased. Second one, it's not cheap, because someone need to pay for this transit. And the third one is purely a security-related one, because every government can create whatever laws they want related to data protection, GDPR or something like that. But that stops at the border of a country. So as soon as the data leaves the country, these laws are not effective anymore. But on the other side, I also have to say, related to this picture, it might look worse than it is. I think right now we don't have the time to go into details, but this is a different representation of the data. And here we're going to see the different ASNs meshed against the other ASNs that are involved. And all the dots that you see that are not green, they show indication that the data travels outside of the country. And in reality, it's only a couple of ASNs that have this issue. So many ASNs do it already correctly, related to local traffic, but not all of them. But it's also not that all of the ASNs within a country have this issue, right? So keep that in mind. Then, coming to my last slide, this is another example of active measurement. This is coming from MLab, which is a Google-supported measurement network where people can run these so-called NDDs, so network diagnostic tests. And one data point that we can draw out of that is bandwidth capacity. And what you're going to see here is a histogram of the distribution of collected measurements. And for your convenience, I also included the CDF, the cumulative distribution function. Well, if that's not too interesting, then let's focus on the meat of that. And I focused on the median, and the median is defined that 50% of all testers have less and 50% have more capacity than is shown here, right? That's a different value than average. Average is prone to outliers. Anyway, this should not be a course in statistics. So what we're going to see in Romania, that the median bandwidth is 19 megabits per second. This is based on 19,000 measurements. Then in Bulgaria we have 17,000, and in Serbia we have 9 million, 9 million. And what's also interesting is that the long tail of this graph is different between Romania, Bulgaria, and Serbia. In Romania, the available bandwidth capacity goes about 200 megabits per second, whereas related to the observed measurements in Bulgaria and Serbia, that's not the case. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to receive some questions from your side.
Yes. Okay. We have 16 minutes for questions.
Go
So
ahead.
Please. You're on the roast now.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Roasting Christian Teuschel.
I don't have a question, but I have an information. I'm an RIPE Atlas ambassador, so if you are interested in hosting a probe, you can ask me for one. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Eric.
Okay. We have lots of time for questions.
I could also start to tell a joke, but I'm usually not that good at it. As yesterday, a couple of people noticed. Thank you for reminding me about that.
Okay. Barry has a question.
Yes, I have one question actually. Have you tried to put some more interpretation in the results of, you said, okay, there are some jumps in the IPv4 allocations, and that's seen in all three countries. How do you interpret that?
Well, related to the IPv6 resources that are registered. The interpretation in many countries is what we see nowadays is very much related to transfers. We see that in some countries you have more IPv4 addresses leaving the countries, and in other countries you have IPv4 resources entering the country. That is sometimes related with the time frame when countries entered the development of the internet. So especially in the Middle East, we have some countries that entered this development quite late, and there is of course a bit of a catch-up to do related to IPv4 resources.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I actually have a question, but
Go
it's
ahead.
more a comment. Can you go back with slides to the IPv6 part, of course?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So where you have allocated and assigned, yeah. So
That one?
go one forward.
Yeah.
So here you talk about IPv6 allocations and IPv6 assignments. So, and I can see you have space for another graph. And it would be nice if you would also put in the actual routes that are showing in the global routing table.
Yes, yeah. So that was a rational decision that I had to make, because it's limited time. It depends how much I can show, and for me it was important that I focus first on the registered resources. I'm happy to do a more extensive interpretation and presentation about that, where we also focus on the routed data. What I showed at the end part of this topic was RIPESTAT. So if you're going to go to RIPESTAT, you immediately see, if you're going to type in the country code, you would get the routed information. But this is a good point. For the next presentation that goes into that direction, I'm going to try to strike a balance between also including routing information.
Yeah, because it would be quite nice, for example, here, if you would have, okay, this is assigned, but then to actually see the discrepancy between what's in the routing table and what's in the database.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a good point. Thank you.
I believe Sergey is wondering about something.
Yes, Sergey Mesedov. No heads. Can you go back to slide number 15?
All right, if I find it. Yeah.
Yes. So can you clarify what is the trend you are measuring here and then on the next slide? I have the feeling that the trend here is like a trend of temperature in the fridge. So it's isolated.
I think the trend is that IPv4 space is a commodity, right? I mean, it's like oil for our economy. And with these numbers, I wanted to visualize, first of all, the requirements for these resources, IPv4 resources, that's related to internet users. Because, I mean, it's not the population that needs IP addresses, respectively internet. It's the number of internet users that require access to the internet. And to have this process going smoothly, you require IP addresses. I totally agree that this, and I think I mentioned that this does not include the infrastructure that is required, because in some countries, you're going to see that this number is completely skewed, because you might have a lot of content providers that even eat up more of the required IPv4 resources that are not available for internet users. That is true, yeah.
Okay, but you can find a country on the globe where a number of available IPv4 resources is unproportional higher, is much higher than the number of population. And so
that is true, yeah.
Does it make sense at all to look for such trends?
Well, as I said, this is just an estimation. That's an indicator of in which direction it goes, related to the data that's available, right? Because on the other side, I also want to stay away of making assumptions on data that is incorrect, right? I mean, I would love to have more data available so that I can refine this picture. But at this moment, we simply don't have the data available for all the countries. And I think what's worse than having no data would be wrong data, because then it could completely derail of the information that I'm going to present.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Are there more questions? Okay, please.
Thank you, Florin Dragomir, Ancom, Romania. Just wondering how the statistics that you showed are also taking into consideration the mobile traffic and the mobile IP allocations.
No, no. That's for the simple reason that we don't have data consistently available for all of these countries. If we're going to have data available that is reliable, that we can use for all countries, then you definitely will find them in this presentation.
So to be sure I understood right, when you said the number of IPv4 addresses, you computed the whole number of IP addresses with, for instance, there was one graph with the fixed penetration. So you compare the entire IPv4 addresses with the percentages for fixed penetration?
No, I compared the number of internet users with the number of available IPv4 space in a country. But again, this is just an indicator. The fixed broadband penetration was related to the GDP, so basically with the economical development, because there was a study from the World Bank that basically claimed that there is a connection between economic development and broadband penetration in a way.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
So we have still 8
anyone
minutes,
else?
right?
No? 3, 2, 1, 0. Thank you very much, Christian. All right, I hope that coffee is ready outside. If it's not, you will have to wait for 10 minutes because you didn't have any more questions.